And we are joined by Justin Garrison, Senior Developer Advocate from yet another containers team here. Today is just the containers episode. Justin, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me on.
So we are here to talk about a different containers launch, and that is AWS App Runner. I know I saw a whole bunch of buzz on social media about this. Before we get into why it is very, very exciting, let's hear the elevator pitch. How would you describe AWS App Runner?
You just spent the last 45 minutes talking about how great containers are. Containers are this thing for developers to say, hey, you know what, like I can ship my app and put it basically anywhere. And I like to think of it a little different, especially at Amazon, right? Like Amazon is kind of known for a different type of container, right? There's a different container everyone might be familiar with that's like, hey, this is the thing that like I can put whatever I want in this container and I can ship it somewhere, like physically ship it and it goes somewhere. I know it's going to get to this destination. And so when I think of App Runner, I think of like, okay, Amazon.com, fantastic. I can buy anything I want there, start as books, expand to basically everything I ever could dream of. I can get it in one of these boxes. At AWS, we also run a lot of containers. Like there's Amazon.com shipping containers all over the world. AWS running containers for people all over the world. And at Amazon, one of the things they did great for let's make this shipping containers easier for people, right? Like the mindset thought of like the Amazon.com is great. How can we make it better? And they know that most customers did the same thing every time. I add it to my cart, I select my address, I select my pay payment, I select date I want it, go. Right? Like 5 steps or whatever. Like they have to do that every time. What they do? One click buy. Right? Like one click, I just like save my defaults. I know this is the type of thing that Amazon did over and over and over again, thousands or millions of times. And it's just like, let's make that easier for people. And so for App Runner, we took the software application, say, hey, if you have software that you want to run, so many people were running web applications. And like, what do I need for a web application? I need to have a container. I put my software in it. I need a load balancer. I need DNS. I need a certificate. Those are the things that they say, hey, this is how I need to expose my app. This isn't 2005 anymore. Like I'm not just like, this isn't like, oh, go to this port, like IP address, whatever. No. 2001, we can do better. And so we know, hey, whether you need the TLS certificate or not, like you get it. Like it's in there, like this should be default on the web. Cool. I can secure my communication with a client to my app no matter what information is there. I need a load balancer so that I can scale that automatically. I like at some point I might need too many requests, whatever, like give me a load balancer. And so with App Runner, we take all of the same Amazon.com insights of like one click buy. Let's just do this thing for the customer, the right thing that they want 99% of the time. In App Runner, we say like, well, like we can do that with containers for software too. Like we can actually package all that up so someone could say, let me give you my container. Here's some software. I know some details about like what's in it or what port I open to listen on a service. But beyond that, like I don't actually care. Like I don't want to have to set up the load balancer. I don't want to set up DNS. I don't want to set up a certificate with rotation and auto scaling, all that stuff. Like it's great if you need it. For me, like I put my stuff in here. The UPS store or the post office is my orchestrator. Like when I'm going to ship this, like they orchestrate they have the network and everything else that they do everything for me to say, here's my contract, here's my address, send it over there, give me a tracking number. App Runner, you bring us a container, you tell us what port it's on, and we will give you a tracking number, basically a service endpoint. And we say, okay, here you go. Here's your public endpoint. You're good. And that's the contract that we get with App Runner. It automates all that stuff. It's almost the one-click buy for containers of just like one-click ship of here you go. I just need an endpoint, run it.
Wow. So let me see if I understand this correctly. You're saying all I need to do is provide the container image and App Runner is going to take care of everything else?
Yeah. If you have a container image, if you don't have a container image, guess what? A lot of people also need to like build it. They need to build it. Like they're like, oh, well, now I need to go like find the box. I need to put the things in it too. But like App Runner also, we're like, well, let's do CI/CD for people too. Like if you don't know how to build a container, if you don't want to do that stuff, we also can just say like, well, okay, well, give me the items. I'll box it up and then I'll send it for you. That is the other model. Like both of them work. You can bring the box directly to App Runner, say, here you go, here's my container, please run it for me. Or here's my stuff. Like I don't know, like here you go, please, I want a public endpoint. Like that's what so many developers, we see that over and over again in AWS. That's what they want to do. That's what they're trying to do. Let's go ahead and consolidate all that stuff. You don't need to worry. There's no load balancer for you to configure and manage. There's no orchestrator. There's no networks to choose, none of that stuff. And because of all that stuff, because we can automate that and package it all together as a single service, the billing for it can actually drop significantly for like, oh, well, let's actually just bill based on requests. Let's bill based on some memory usage and if you're auto scaling or not. And like builds, I can have my builds actually build per minute instead of like, I need to run Jenkins or this other infrastructure to like automate this. And so all of that stuff, just we can package it directly in App Runner. And we saw these patterns over and over again with developers, small and large, where the tiny startups, the one person groups of like, I just want to publish a website, can do it, but also enterprises can do it at scale and say, hey, actually, I might need control over some of that stuff. I might need to build my own UPS network of things, but maybe there's also just like stuff that I just want an endpoint for. Like just I handle the certificates, handle the load balancers, and we're good.
Yeah, like this box analogy is actually really salient, and people in Twitch chat are really enjoying it too. I think it actually it I don't use more container terminology than necessary here. It demonstrates a really good point. Like for example, if I wanted to take this what's next mug and ship it to you, right? I could get a box, and that box could be the contract with the logistics or the whoever's going to handle transporting that. But then, how many packing peanuts? What type of packing peanuts should I put in there? How much tape should I use on the box? I'm terrified. I just want to make sure that you get this thing in one piece, and I already have it here, and that's something that I don't want to waste time thinking about. And there are so many proverbial, equivalents here in software that I just don't want to worry about. And it sounds like App Runner takes care of the people like me, where I have my application and it works on my machine, and I'm just trying to get it to work on other people's machine, and it's removing some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting. Is that right here?
Nick, please, come on. Once is enough.
I just slide it in again. He didn't even like make note of it. He's like, no, undifferentiated heavy lifting. Like
no
mumble
warning.
it almost of like, okay.
Justin, sorry. Just one thought on this. I too really think this is an apt analogy because, but I think there's another very interesting physicality to the way that you presented it, which is that when we think about containers, the original impetus for containers was literal shipping containers that were moved around on boats and trucks and trains, right? And I think what you're showing is a small box that you can hold in your hand, right? And that's another interesting dimension to the visual analogy that you're using here, because as what I'm seeing is like when Docker first came onto the scene, absolutely, people who really rolled up their sleeves and got deep into it, they saw how transformative it could be, and Docker in particular, and containers in general, right? How these concepts can be so transformative for software all across so many different industries. But I think what we're seeing now, especially when we're talking to Nathan earlier with ECS Anywhere, what we've seen lately with Kubernetes, what we've seen with a lot of our other services and features being launched around our containers services, is just this notion of being able to take your application of any size and shape. No longer is this kind of a super heavy lift. Is your workload worth getting an entire shipping container for? The answer now is no, right? The box is the size that you want it to be. It doesn't have to be this huge container before it makes sense for you to use it.
And funny thing about that analogy specifically with containers, the shipping containers, the reason those were revolutionary was because they utilized the ship more. At scale, they added so much value and cut down so much wasted cost on the ships going across the sea because they could package whatever they want, a car, packing peanuts, a water bottle, whatever. Like it could be a uniform shape that they could rely on, and they could stack them, and they could do whatever. Like they knew how to do that, and then tooling was built on that. Cranes knew these are my hook points. It was no longer like, oh, I'm getting a shipment of Audis. Like those have toe points in different places. I need a different crane for this. Like no. Like standardize the shipping piece, and all of the tooling and infrastructure can work for anything at that point. And that's where the container really gets a lot of value, because it's not just oh, I want to package this and run it on my laptop and my coworker's laptop. No. This is like all of the tooling around it now understands containers. And we can say like, oh, well, like my CI/CD system understands containers. My production and development environment understand containers. And that's where that ecosystem of usability and just tooling made all of that stuff accelerates for the shipping industry and for the software industry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going back to like what it looks like hands-on to use App Runner now, because I'm sold on like exactly how it's providing me value. If a customer just has to show up, bring a container image for their application, and App Runner is taking care of the rest, I almost feel silly asking like, well, why is this the model that we think is effective? Because it's pretty obvious why. But like, I think this gets into a broader sort of like, well, do I want to manage something and do I get value out of managing it, or does handing that off in a more standardized way to another type of technology or another abstraction layer, does that make sense? Like, where does this App Runner type model fit in the grand scheme of all the other tools and abstraction models?
A lot of that's ownership. If I want to own, if I want to bring this box and I want to package that mug myself, like, hey, you know what, like I think I can do a better job than what the person at the store can do. Like, okay, that's fine. I will handcraft. I will package this thing. I will put it there. I'll put a nice note in there for whoever opens it. Right? Like maybe I'm not going to get that from some automated system, but like those are things like that ownership. I can do that. I can still bring it. I can do that piece of it. So ownership models of like, hey, you know what? Like my load balancer for my application needs something special. Like I want to add some headers. I want to inject some auth. I want to do something else on the network or before the app that like I need some ownership over. For App Runner, we're targeting like the mass of what we see of people, what they're doing over and over again. Hey, I want a web service and I open a port and I listen to traffic. I can probably do some things concurrently, but I don't have long running background jobs. I'm not doing like workers that are doing like night cron stuff and like all that stuff. And like there's different systems that can do those things. This App Runner is very specific. We want to make the web service endpoints and security and deployment seamless. And that's the piece that we are optimizing App Runner for. And just like, hey, if that's my ownership model, if I can say, hey, I can develop within those use cases, which a lot of developers can, a lot of apps can. That's what we saw over and over again. It's great. If there are those situations of like, well, I want this to run on the Raspberry Pis on my desk. Like Nate, like go ahead, keep using like ECS anywhere is a great model for that sort of stuff. Of like, hey, you need it sometimes in the cloud, you need it sometimes on prem, you need some locality around it, something like that. There are other models of that ownership. For App Runner, if your app can fit in that model of I publish a web service on a port, I don't need long running background jobs. I handle requests. I give them back out. In a lot of cases, people sometimes compare it to Lambda, which is similar but different. Where Lambda is like execute my thing and then go away, and App Runner is actually executing multiple things in the same service. There's some benefits that we get out of a long running, always there sort of footprint of avoiding cold starts. We have some scratch space on disk. I can store some cache and memory. Some of those things are really useful for applications too. And both models work depending on your application. But we saw with containers, a lot of times they say, hey, with a container, I do want to run a web service long running. This is what I need out of ever like a GraphQL endpoint for an API. Like in-memory caching for GraphQL is kind of critical for performance sometimes. And so you can do some of that stuff in a shared container model, which is great for a lot of developers.
Yeah, definitely. Not to mention the ability to have more flexibility around connection lifetimes, so you can create, you know, WebSocket gateways, that sort of thing, that have slightly longer lived connections and lifetimes than your standard Lambda function. One question I had, because it sounds like you're talking about App Runner abstracting away a lot of the underlying details, the infrastructure, the SSL certificates, even packaging up the application itself. Let's say somebody is getting started with App Runner, and they've built, let's say some, Node.js web application or something. Just how much do they need to know about containers in general and App Runner in particular? Or how much should they know?
If they have a Node.js application, I mean, they don't really need to know anything. Node.js is one of the supported builds languages. So they can just, drop down, I have a Node.js, application, here's my Git repo. Every time I git push, it can build and deploy for you automatically. So you can go both sides of just like, hey, you can fully manage that. Right now, Node and Python are supported, but plenty of other languages and tooling around automate that are coming in the future. But if you have Python or a Node app, and you can tell it like, hey, this is the port I publish on. This is the like command I run to start my web service. That's and like here's the command npm install. Like those are the like three things you might need to know. And as a developer, you probably know those things anyway. And so that's just kind of like, hey, let's take what you already know, and we can take care of the rest for you if you want.
Yeah, I know you've said this a number of times, but I'm now contrasting other options for how I would run a container quickly, and we know that there's certainly a number of them. But I think a really big feather in the hat here is this CI/CD and auto build mechanism, right? Like time to public endpoint is so fast when App Runner is going to take, let's say you have a linked GitHub repo, and let's say every time you update on your main branch, it is then going to build and deploy for you. Like, I know there's alternative container services someone could use even on AWS, but I can't imagine a faster sort of time to value, or time to 200, I know is a new term people are throwing around, than the App Runner model here.
It's funny with that too, because there's some hidden things in there that sometimes you don't think about. We're like, oh, I'm going to build this container. Like I can do the Docker build command with a tag. Oh, I need a registry now. Like I need to like, oh, let me set up a registry. Let me go push that. Oh, I need to make sure like my tags are set up right. Oh, I need authentication. Oh, I need like all of those things come into play here of just people did them over and over and over again. And we just say, oh, you know what? Like we can manage the registry for you. If you hook up your GitHub repo, automatic deploys with a git push, like we will do the builds, we control the registry, you don't worry about auth, you don't worry about like registry rate limits, you don't worry like all those things that like some people never will hit a limit on. It's not a big deal. But as you scale, you start hitting these edge cases of like, oh well, actually I need to scale my app whenever I got 50 requests or 100 requests, or oh, I needed this registry to do something else for me. And with managed services with App Runner, like a lot, they're just taken care of. Just okay, well, this is fine. If you want to build it, if you want to control it, if you need that control, that ownership, you can do it still. You can just say, oh, here's my container. Please run that for me. You can have that control. But the other side is also true.
Yeah, I think the point about the CI/CD thing, we definitely want to see more of this. So maybe this will be answered in the demo, and you can tell me that. But I'm curious to know, when you say that this thing does CI/CD, I think people hear that and they have a wide range of reactions, like oh no, or oh yes, like you know what I mean, because it means something different for everybody, right? So for example, let's say today I have a workflow that involves, hey, I push to the main branch, and main branch triggers a setting up a test environment. The test environment is where I'm gonna run my integration tests, and if that happens, then I push to the registry, and I look for a certain tag, and I do. But it sounds like what App Runner is going to do in this case is make all of that fully opinionated. And that's kind of going back to the question I was asking of how much does the developer need to know about App Runner. I understand that the general thrust of all these services is to say, look, you can focus on the application, you can focus on the business. I guess what I'm asking is, in some of those cases where customers have gone to the lengths of building some of these customized workflows, especially around CI/CD, if you were to really summarize, is it a single value proposition? Is it a single golden path through App Runner, or how customizable is it? How much can you lift up the hood and kind of tweak the knobs and dials?
So there's a App Runner YAML file is the default for like, hey, I can put this in my GitHub repo, and I can run a pre-build command. I can build command, like all those things I can define in this YAML file of what's going to happen during my build process, whether it's run some tests ahead of time, verify these things. That's in there, and that's the main interface for people. That's essentially like the web interface for it is just what values you're going to do in your App Runner YAML file. And so you can customize it that way of just like, oh, every time. And then if I need to change my build process, I update that file. It's in Git, which is all just a great workflow most people are used to. There are a lot of extreme custom things that people do in CI/CD systems that, for good and bad, like they need ownership of it. They need something. I've seen so many, make files orchestrated with Jenkins that's build a container that then pull down another container that like all those things, like they can have full, integration tests end to end. I'm going to deploy this as a canary and do this. Like some of that ownership is beyond what App Runner is bringing to the table. App Runner is not going to automate some of that right now. Like that's not the goal. We are still targeting what we see as a major use case of I have an app, simple-ish service. It needs to run some commands. It needs to build it. You can run it on a team. You can run an enterprise, but like the complexity that you're going to bring, and if you say like I have to be in Jenkins or I have to be in GitHub Actions or something, like you can do that yourself. You can hook up that CI/CD, and again, you can have both contracts of here's my box, here's my container, please just run this piece, it's at this registry. App Runner, you take care of just the run pieces, that last mile of how I'm going to run the service. If your app fits the actual CI/CD model that we prescribe of, hey, you need to do some build steps, before you build your app to package your container and then run, those things can absolutely fit inside of App Runner's, current CI/CD system.
Yeah. I think as we're discussing this is starting to sound a lot like Heroku. Is that a fair comparison? How would you respond to that?
Heroku's nailed the developer interface for a lot of people for more than a decade. They've been around for a while. They said, hey, what if all this was Git? What if we didn't need another tool? In many cases, they had to have another tool. They had to have Heroku CLI to say like, hey, for complex things, you need to do these other pieces. But originally it was, I have a Ruby app and I have Git. I know those two things. I can deploy to Heroku and I don't need to learn anything else beyond that, which is great. They had to make a lot of assumptions for that sort of environments. App Runner's opening that up to say, hey, anything in a container can run. Right now, CI/CD is automated with Python and Node, but if you have that container, bring it, we'll run it for you. Heroku didn't have that originally. Now, obviously you can. Heroku CLI, you can integrate with a bunch of other things. And App Runner just launched last week. And it is, taking some of that experience for a developer and saying, hey, maybe you can learn less tools and still be productive and still get some flexibility and still be able to ship things really well. And we can take care of the back end, authenticate your GitHub repo, and we'll give you an endpoint. If you want to set up DNS, that's cool too. Optionally, here's a YAML file. You can check it in and you can version things that way. So absolutely the workflow and experience should be familiar if you've been doing something that was sort of a Git workflow of I check in code and a new app goes out. Like I don't need to think about anything else in between. Health checks, all that scaling. If it fails, I don't need to be paged. Just handle it. Oh, and metrics are built in too, by the way. Like logging and metric, CloudWatch, just integrate it. Like we know how to health check this stuff. We know how to check CPU and memory now. I can see my requests on graphs, like all that stuff. Just handle it for me. I don't want to actually deal with that. Like just give me some of that stuff out of the box. And as AWS, like, again, we've been doing this for a long time. We know how to run containers, especially web services. So we can do that over and over and over again.
Yeah, when I hear this, I'm rehearing Rob's question, and I'm thinking of it sort of like inverted on its head when Rob was asking, how much do I need to know about CI/CD build systems or even container methodologies and Docker and a number of things, right? In the same way that I don't have to know anything about how my package goes from the one-click button to it arriving on my doorstep, you don't need to know a lot of that here. So to me, it seems like App Runner is an opinionated tool that allows me to take the skills that I have already, and many devs do for the applications that they're authoring, and then makes you not need to learn a whole bunch of other skills or do a bunch of heavy lifting, I won't say the full term, to get you to where you want to be, which is a public endpoint. And obviously it's great because it seems like you have sort of like bi-directional, you have the flexibility if you want it in that configuration YAML file. Obviously some assumptions are made, but it's, again, not supposed to be a silver bullet. It doesn't work for everything. There are other tools that one could use. But let's take a hypothetical situation. I'm a developer. I have some container workloads. App Runner sounds like a great fit for me. What am I going to gain by pulling those into App Runner? So you mentioned metrics, just sort of as an offhand comment, right? The ability to have an application already sort of instrumented is a really cool one. What am I going to get end to end by putting my new container workload here into App Runner?
A lot of things you don't want to worry about anymore. Like I said, I mean, cert rotation, registry authentication, CI/CD, metrics, all those things. It's just like we see the commonality of I need to run a web service, I can package it in a container. And again, like CI/CD Node and Python right now, but like you can bring your Java app, bring your, the first time I was testing this, I was testing with a bash script, like a bash script, listen on a port and like serve a hello world. Like you can run a bash script in a container that listens on a port. And that is like, don't do that in production, please, but bring whatever language that can do this sort of cycle of deploy whatever it is an app is for you. And you'll get all of that stuff for you out of the box of just it's there and ready to go.
That's awesome. You made a lot of claims. I'm gonna have to see that in a demo, especially some of this GitHub workflow. I'm really excited. Is there something that you have ready that we can take a look at?
Yeah, here, let me share. Pull up my screen. So here's the default. Hopefully it's coming in for you.
Yeah, you're good.
This is just a launch. The launch blog that I wrote, showing off a little bit of. I wrote this Hello App Runner app just to kind of show some of the differences of why App Runner adds some value on having this sort of shared container execution environments that I go into in depth in the blog post, but I'll show you the app as well, just because we'll go ahead and deploy that. So I'll go with the prepackaged deployment model right now, just because it's the easiest thing and it's fast. But I'll also show you a couple of the details on the Git repo. So if you go into AWS console, find App Runner, and all we need to do is create our App Runner service. And this is, as easy as you might want it to be. We have some options here of, do I have a container registry, something that's like, here's my box, package it up, just ship that thing, or the source code repository is, okay, well, let's connect to GitHub and actually deploy that. So in this case, we're gonna go container registry. We have a Amazon ECR. If you have a private registry, you don't want your application container, publicly available, you can put it in a private repo. I'm gonna do public because we actually publish the Hello app in ECR public. So it's already a public container. You can just pull this down and run it. And so all I need to do literally is like click okay, here's my, URL for this. And we're just going to paste it in of, okay, this is what we got. That's as much information as needed at this point of like, where's the container packaged? Where does it exist? Do we well, eventually we know we want support for Docker Hub, but for now, ECR public and ECR private.
So, but before
with a public,
sorry, I'm interrupting. Before we get into anything downstream there on the deployment, I know folks always like to like reduce to acronyms, and some people are like, is this bring your own code? Is this bring your own, whatever? I'm seeing here that customers have the option to bring your own repo, essentially, bring your own container image, or bring a container registry, essentially, that you can just like link directly to the images, sorry, like the reference to that registry. So really a broad number of options for what your entry point into App Runner can be.
Yeah, and again, that's all that ownership model of, hey, I have a GitHub repo or I have a prepackaged container. If it's a GitHub repo, we'll handle the CI/CD for you. If it's a container registry, you own that, and you can do whatever you want to ship that container to a registry. If it is like a private registry, if I look at ECR, I do need to say like, oh, what IAM credentials can access that registry. So we have some security there on, oh yeah, by the way, this is private. Here's some, whatever credentials you need to actually get that image. In ECR public right now, we don't have automatic deployment triggers. So like a new push into ECR public, like I have to come in here and or CLI say, okay, deploy the new version. But for now, it's a manual trigger. So, but I can go next on this. I just need to give it a name. I don't think I have a Hello app in here yet. I can say how big I want the actual container like compute resources to be. 1 or 2 CPU and up to 4 gigs of RAM right now. And this is per instance. So every single instance of your container running will get this replicated. So if I have 2 instances of it, I'll have, 2 CPU and 4 gigs of memory across my application, gets load balanced between them automatically. My port for
that add environment variable, those envars can be pulled from the App Runner YAML file in your code repo. Are we going to see a separate demo where you pull this from a GitHub repo?
This account doesn't actually have access into my GitHub repo, so I wasn't going to show that off to auth. I didn't know how much time we had for that, but yeah. So okay, I don't have that whole thing, but I will show at the end. I'll show what that App Runner YAML looks like, and I'll show this app is also open source, so anyone that wants to run it can literally just fork this repo and go through this workflow and deploy it. So in here, if you want to override a start command for my container, again, how much ownership do you want? This is already prepackaged. I know my app runner app runs with Python app.py. I can set at what level I want to auto scale. So right now defaults are 100 requests. So anytime this container receives 101 requests, App Runner will spin up another instance and start sending more traffic over to that other instance. And so I know, okay, how much traffic can one instance take? And then we'll scale on that. So if I wanted to set this to like, oh, my service can only handle 2 requests or something, if it's for some reason doing a bunch of work or it's a bash script, you can set those as what you want for your request, as well as we start at 1 instance and this can scale up to 25. So based on the defaults, I could handle 2,500 concurrent requests at any given minutes. And at that point, my app would stop scaling, but you can also scale higher if you need to. So again, App Runner is great for like, whether it's really small or you think it's going to grow really large, like you can actually fit App Runner in there for just keep scaling up, adding more. As long as you're horizontally scaling that, you can keep adding instances. Health check, just to say, hey, is the application healthy? Right now, this is a TCP-based health check. Check the port, is it there? But also HTTP is on the roadmap to be able to check, oh, if you actually have like a health endpoint on your app to like do some other checking or something, it also works. But for now, I could, kill the app process or stop listening on the port to mark the app as unhealthy. Security is all about my container could access other Amazon resources based on IAM credentials. So this is what instance role, what sort of credentials do you want to give to this container to access other AWS resources, whether that's a database endpoint or an S3 bucket or something that might need this access. You can give that on a container level basis here and just say, okay, this container also has some AWS, SDK in it. I'm going to do some work on, talking to some other resources. Right now, private VPC endpoints aren't in App Runner, but definitely on the roadmap, we hear people that want that. Hey, I have a private in my VPC resource that I want to talk to. We know we'll be able to, do that in the future to say, okay, you can also access things privately. Right now, every App Runner instance has a public URL and is available on the public internet. In the future, we would definitely like to have some private endpoints that can talk within your VPC alone. And then standard tags for billing or tracking or finding what team a service is on or what environment it's in can be added to the instances as well. Just a summary here recaps everything that I just clicked and said, this is what we want to do, create and deploy. It wasn't quite one click buying from Amazon.com, but I think I only had to type a name and a port.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the service to be created, I think like what's really apparent to me here is I just brought an application. I didn't have to bring like infrastructure as code here with the CDK or CloudFormation templates or even understand a lot of the other underlying tools that would be used to do things like IAM. I mean, obviously you need a role that exists, right? But I didn't have to put that into my application code. That wizard there essentially enabled me to do everything from the scalability of my application to access to other resources that may exist in my AWS account. And I didn't have to change the application code at all to be able to set those parameters.
Yep. And if you look at, we have support for CloudFormation, we have support for Pulumi and Terraform and other infrastructure as code, services. If you look at the actual like spec for it, it's pretty simple because it's like there's not a lot that you have to manage. You can say, hey, bring this in from a container, or go ahead and like tie this together even with a Git repo and you want CI/CD or whatever. Like if you want to define those things in code, you can do that. But even in those cases, like it's way less than if I want to spin up a EKS cluster or an ECS cluster and I say, oh, I want to pick my orchestrator. Oh, I want to pick EC2 or Fargate. I need, auto scaling group, and then I need to attach a load balancer. Oh, get me that ACM certificate. Oh, here's my registry. Here's the certificates for that. Like all those things trying to tie them together. Again, App Runner is a managed service. Like it just does all that stuff that we saw people doing over and over and over again for you. And this is your experience to be able to say, okay, what do I want? I actually have the, if I look at the code repo over here, I have a command line. Like here's the minimum spec to deploy this App Runner hello image of, okay, here's the YAML you need. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of YAML. And then other than that, I give it a name, and everything else is defined right here for like, pull in that container for me and run a service. And so I was going to also show this off as we were going. This hello app is public on GitHub. You can fork it. It already has the App Runner YAML in it. So if you want to go through that workflow, you can connect App Runner to your GitHub. And here, where's the App Runner YAML? Here's the App Runner YAML. It's defined as 2 commands to build the container of, I need this Python, and I have a requirements text file that installs some more things in it. Here's how I run my application, and here's a port. And that's all I need, and everything else is managed for me. For that goes into the registry, that creates the container image, authentication, everything is there.
Yeah, and about that port configuration, I assume that App Runner is going to figure that out and connect that with the load balancer, and on that instance, the traffic will be routed to the right port automatically.
Yep. Yeah, as I was creating the service, I tell it what port I'm listening on, and App Runner just says, okay, well, we're going to route every traffic from this DNS request to your port here, and you handle stuff and send it back to us.
So in other words, if I wanted to change the listening port for the local Python application in this case, I change that in my Python code itself. And then I also change this config file and change, let's say, to like port 9000. And I don't need to touch anything else, and everything works.
Yep. And actually in here, I was testing this before in the app itself. Oh, if it's going to load, there it goes. Where's my app? There's my app. If I go all the way to the bottom, I do listen on environment variable. So you could even do that. I listen for a port environment variable already. So it's defaults to 8000. But if you want to, like, during deployment, say, oh, here's my environment variable 9001, and then tell App Runner, oh, I'm listening on 9001, both the app and the load balancer will both be configured for 9001. Customers still hit it at 443. It's not that's not changing for a customer on the public endpoints, but the application itself listens. And that's another thing. Like, you're not dealing with port conflicts of like, oh, someone else stole 8000 in App Runner. It's like, no. Like, that actually doesn't matter. Inside the container, Docker and these things figured that a long time ago of like, oh, well, look, dynamically, we're going to create a public port for you. In your app, you can always think that you have 80. We don't care. On the instances, you don't actually have 80. It's fine.
Yeah, and this is just a quick kind of aside that I love. And it's often easy to take advancements in the infrastructure space for granted. But before Docker came along, let's reminisce about the good old days of instances that we basically treated as pets, right? And so you deploy an application that expected to listen on a certain port, and the port would be taken because there was another instance of the application. So vertically scaling on a single instance to take advantage of multiple CPUs on a single instance was just annoying all around. Nobody really got any value out of doing that kind of work. And this is just one of the problems that Docker solved a long time ago. But now we can see that this is kind of this is just kind of an aside and a continuation, and me probably showing how outdated I am about what I appreciate and what I don't appreciate. But another question. Yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say, honestly, port conflicts were the easy thing to change. I list on something else. The hard thing was like someone had Python 2.4 and I needed Python 2.8, and that was the difficult one of like, oh, now I need another server because I can't override. Like, those sorts of things were like Python environments. All these things happened, and Docker containers allow you to do that on a server, no problem. And App Runner is just taking that to the next level of like, oh yeah, by the way, here's your public endpoint.
Yeah, or another fun variation of that one is DLL in Windows environments.
Yeah.
On Windows Server, that got really weird because hey, it's like guess what? This one's running Service Pack 2 and Service Pack 3, and that's going to subtly replace a couple of DLLs that break your APIs in very weird ways. But one thing I wanted to go back to, if you can go back to that App Runner YAML file where we were looking at the port, and I think port just serves as a really good example here. Going back to my question earlier, so could I put environment variables in this YAML file?
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, there's definitely a step. I don't have the documentation up right now, but in the docs, there's definitely a full spec of what this can have, because there's even other, like in build, you can have a pre-build, you can have builds, you can have posts, so you can do other steps there. You can define environment variables. I was showing the bare minimum for something like this,
okay,
as an example.
just so that I understand, what we could do is put a section in here that says, hey, the environment variable, all caps, port is 8,000. And then later on down here, instead of hard coding port 8,000 on line 11, we would be able to reference that as a variable. Is that how that works?
Not inside of here directly. Like this in the App Runner YAML, it's not, nothing's going to replace that as an environment variable before it gets sent to App Runner.
Okay.
So at the last defined port is what you tell App Runner, this is the port I'm listening on. If you wanted to use like environment substitute as a command to wrap your app runner YAML and then send that, you can do those sorts of things as templating, but it's not something that's like built into App Runner of like, oh, let's always define these as variables.
Got it.
I see the application is now deployed. I'm eager to see it. You want to jump back over?
And I mean, yeah, it's a simple web page. We did a couple things in this that was why I wanted to show this off as, hey, this is a little different than something else. One of the things that I had the idea for was actually like each application that we deploy gets a unique avatar. And so we actually generate that on startup. Okay, let's create a very unique avatar and write it to disk. We have a little bit of scratch space, and it can show that, hey, if 50 people request this, they're all going to get, well, you actually don't see the avatar. You see it when you share it. Was kind of the hidden feature here of like, okay, now if I tweet my endpoints, you'll see my actual like preview here inside of Twitter will autofill eventually. Sometimes Twitter doesn't catch up. Let's go ahead and just tweet it and I'll get it. Oop, there it is. This is an awesome avatar. I have no idea. So that gets that banner basically got generated for me on the fly during App Runner start. So any other request, if anyone else tweets this link, they're also going to see this same image. And I can probably find, I don't remember the exact path actually, because it was a whole week and I don't remember things like that. Was it social PNG? No, that wasn't. I think it's under static or image. I'll find it. I know it.
I feel like
there it is.
Oh,
so we write it to disk.
In the
we just write the file to disk, and we can say, and that's like one of the things. This container is long running, so it's something that any request. I don't have to do this work over and over again. If I was doing this in say Lambda, I probably would write this file and I'd stick it in S3, and I'd pull it out of S3 every time I wanted to share it to someone. In this case, I could do the operation once. I know this is going to work. And the way I actually hash this image creation, as I scale up, I'll still get the same image. So every instance of my container, if I go from 1 or to 50, all of them will generate this same image and I'll get the same thing.
And is that because these, all of these containers, as you start to auto scale, that they have basically shared disk scratch space, or that they're using the same inputs and generating the same image over and over on local scratch space?
They don't share a volume between them right now. It's still horizontally scalable and stateless in that regard. They do share the same seed data. I actually use the URL because the URL is the same. So they say, hey, what URL did request me on? Because that's coming from the load balancer. And I use that as seed data and then generate that image based on that. And so it was just a neat trick to show like, oh, cool. I can horizontally scale something and have some consistency without baking. I could bake the image in, but anyone that deploys this, please tweet it because I love seeing all the generated ones. If you deploy this, tweet it out. I see them occasionally because I have a hashtag that I just watch. And so it's super fun to see like randomly generated avatars show up in my timeline.
Yeah.
And the other thing we do here is actually, I put a metrics endpoints. Again, metrics are built in. CloudWatch logs built into the application. I don't actually need this. I built this as showing where in-memory cache can be used for certain data. So in this case, I published Prometheus metrics, which are pretty common in the container world of, oh, I have something that scrapes these Prometheus metrics and they gather this data. So I can see based on this, oh, this is, garbage collection of Python. This is probably really small for you. It doesn't really matter. It's just, this is long-lived inside of the memory of my application served on an endpoint. So if I have in-memory cache I want to use, data like metrics, if I have something else that I need to actually serve and save in memory, that is long-lived over requests. So if this instance gets 1 request or gets 5,000 requests, that in-memory data still exists. And in this case, adds to counters, calculates, latency, all that sort of stuff. And so I can see that in my metrics data that's saved in memory right now.
I love the metrics story here because I feel like out of whenever I have a demo app and I deploy it, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna toss this away. I have the like to-do list is always the same, right? It's like metrics, add like additional features around like CI/CD, and like this is really just available out of the box right here with App Runner. Like I didn't have to instrument my application. I didn't have to think about like how this is going to play with CloudWatch. I literally just brought my code in either the repo format or an image, and now I'm seeing that right here in the console with the request count in real time, or at least at the sample rate that CloudWatch pulls at.
Yeah, and we definitely, okay, what are people commonly looking at with, web applications? Request count, HTTP 200s, 400s, 500s. Like these things are just built in. I did nothing to set up these metrics. I just deployed the app and this is what I get. I can see my latency. All that stuff is there. It's same thing with like, if I look at my logs, we have a couple different options for logs to kind of like collect them together. One is event log from App Runner itself of like, hey, we're deploying, we're passing health checks, so we're actually going to start sending data. But I can also look at as I created the service, what was happening, or my application itself, like what standard out logs from my container, and I can see like, oh, here, like this is me requesting that endpoint. Um, those sorts of things just happen. Like I didn't do anything for this. This is App Runner. We said, hey, people need logs. We can integrate that. You can view it in CloudWatch. If you have a partner and you want to get that data out of CloudWatch, go somewhere else. If Datadog shipped with day one, integration, Logs.io, there was a handful of them. I cannot even remember all of them right now. All of those integrations are in CloudWatch, and so many things integrate with CloudWatch. If you don't want to use CloudWatch directly, that's fine too. Again, this App Runner is designed so that you don't necessarily outgrow it. If you want to have some of that customization, if you want to ship some of this data somewhere else, it's not this like you have to stay within these boundaries. We'll do it for you. We'll give it, to you by default, but you don't have to like say, oh, well, I have to go to ECS now because I can't use Datadog. No, like actually a lot of the stuff just works out of the box and integrates with third parties.
That is very slick. Can you take a look at, can you go back to custom domains for a second? I just wanted to see what the experience was like there because you had talked about that a little bit. Maybe we don't have time for this, but can you just kind of walk us through how this works? Because you mentioned TLS, you mentioned adding an ACM certificate, and that just takes care of renewal and everything for you. That's something that everybody's done too many times. But yeah, can you just walk us through that real quick?
Yeah, how many dashboards and alerts have I had over my career of this certificate's expiring next week or this certificate expired 2 weeks ago? It happens, and it's a thing that no one really wants to do. And then you have to try to like Google search for those, like, what were those, SSL commands to renew the cert, or who has the private key, whatever. Like, it's not something super fun. So here, App Runner integrates with ACM. ACM is our managed certificates. We will rotate them. We will handle all that stuff for you. Of you need to add some domain verification of like you own the domain, but beyond that, you're good to go. If I look at, and we definitely, there's some opportunity here to even more integrate. If you have a Route 53 domain, we definitely want to automate some of this stuff for you too, and say like, oh, here's my zone that's in Route 53. Go ahead and do this stuff for me. Definitely some things we want to do. If I look at tests, I don't think that's it's one of my domains, but it's not in Route 53, so I can't actually connect it right now. But you'll need to set up 3 CNAMEs. One for the actual like, hey, I'm going to forward this traffic, and 2 for the actual certificate validation. There it is. And so I can see, once I add these in DNS, and again, you don't have to use Route 53. You can take these values and put them wherever you're hosting your DNS. And as long as those values exist in DNS and ACM can look them up, your certificate will be valid. You'll route over to wherever. I have one already set up. If I look at app.runner.jgar.net, this was like my initial launch that I set up a custom domain for, where I just said, oh, well, this is one that like in another account, app.runner.jgar.net. Let's go ahead and deploy that to my test application. And so I used this one because it was a consistent avatar, and so I could always like, oh, that's my avatar, I know that one. So I generated it for my application, and then I created a custom domain for it just to make sure that I could always get back to it. So absolutely, it should work seamlessly once you add these values. Oops, go back over here. once you add the values to verify your certificate and forward the traffic, you're good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, super slick. And again, just enjoy seeing the working backwards that is evident here from what customers are wanting to do with an application. You just want it to be able to be available publicly. Sometimes you want a domain for it. You want to look at your metrics. You want to look at your logs. And I think that just like, again, that initial wizard that you showed at the front end of this demo, like just a few clicks with a lot of optional parameters where you can just have your application launched in just a few moments.
Yeah, and it is opinionated, but it is also meant to be flexible. If I want those environment variables, if I want to change those ports, if I want the domains, bare minimum, you bring us 3 pieces of information: a port, a name for the service, and a container image, and we'll do it. If you want more, if you want to do building, if you want CI/CD, if you want environment all that stuff, absolutely, you can bring that too. And we also can hook some of that stuff up, do automated CI/CD and registry publishing for you.
Perfect. Well, I'm sold. Awesome demo, Justin. Is there anything else you want to cover or talk about in terms of the service itself?
I know I saw it in the Twitch chat here, but we do have a public roadmap. If people want to get involved, if they want to say, hey, I need this feature, I have this use case, absolutely put it on the public roadmap, because that's somewhere we're looking for getting some information back from the community on, hey, we saw so many containers doing this. Now, how does this fit your specific use cases? What are the things that might be gaps, or what do you want as a better integration or something? And that public roadmap is the best place to do it right now. So it's all public on GitHub. I'm sure it can go in Twitch chat as far as like, we have some things that we also, if you want to subscribe to things of private VPC access and private endpoints, they're on the project already. You can subscribe to them. As we update them, as we ship it, you'll get an email from GitHub. It's a great way, just open, let people see what's going on, see where priorities are, and then also +1 any features that you say, hey, I actually really need Java CI/CD. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up on that, because we see if there's 100, if there's 200, whatever the case may be, and we can say, wow, we actually get a lot of feedback. We might, in that issue say, okay, what's the specific use case? Hey, does this fit for you? And that's a great place to get involved and have some impact on that roadmap.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. And I almost laugh just asking this, but if customers want to dive even deeper than we did today, there was that blog post that they can arrive at. We'll have a link to that in chat. I also saw a video from another show that streams here, Containers from the Couch. Anything that you covered over there that customers may want to catch up on if this is interesting to them?
In that, we tried to go through the workshop. We do have a apprunnerworkshop.com, which goes into a few more things of, hey, I want to deploy a different app. This actually walks you through, let's connect to our GitHub repo and deploy a Node.js app. And so in this case, it'll walk you through a little more detail. We do have more content that we want to add to the workshop here, but you could deploy the Hello app first and go right to the docs, the workshop, or tweet the image as the 3 main things that we figured people might want to dig more into it. And we try to put those front and center on, let's see how easy it is just to deploy this thing. Okay, now I want to deploy more things to it, and let's figure that out. So absolutely dive deep on some of that as well.
Yeah, that workshop looks very nice, very self-contained. We'll be in touch with you offline about that.
All right, Justin, this is awesome. Obviously, I know a lot of customers were excited about this launch, but just even selfishly, this is so exciting, and I can't wait to start moving some of my containerized apps here, because to your point, there's a lot of knobs and dials that I don't care to play with, that I don't need to own or manage, that I do in some of my other alternatives, and App Runner really seems like it's going to solve them. So I am going to do what I think a lot of people in Twitch chat are probably going to do. They've been convinced that they want to use App Runner. I'm going to go to that App Runner workshop. We'll drop a link in chat. And then that's just a self-service guide for getting up to speed and doing a lot of the things that we saw you do today. But again, you don't have to watch a video while you're doing it. You can follow step by step. So always excited to see that here around from launch day. Customers want it. They want to know how to use it. And thank you for providing that. Wonderful. Well, I think that's all of the time that we have for this session. Justin, this has been really eye-opening. And again, a container-packed episode today where we had ECS Anywhere before, and then now you telling us about AWS App Runner. Rob and I are gonna ruminate over the launches after we cane you off stage here. But thank you again for all of your time. This was super awesome.